And we return to one of the main topics of the week, the NATO summit in The Hague, which clearly demonstrated that Europeans dependent on the American security system are not ready for radical changes due to the mood of the President of the United States. As a result, they chose the path of boundless flattery and restructured the entire meeting agenda to suit Trump's preferences. What could Ukraine have lost at this summit and what did it achieve? An exclusive behind-the-scenes report from TSN's international correspondent Yana Slesarchuk. Watch next.
How can Zelensky attend the NATO summit without provoking Trump? Just a couple of years ago, he was hoping to return from Vilnius with an invitation to join NATO.
I would like this hope to become confidence in the decisions we deserve. All of them.
Already a year ago in Washington, there were no such expectations, but there were new weapons.
Today, I am announcing a historic allocation of air defense systems for Ukraine.
Now, there is a very brief final declaration and the shortened duration of the summit itself.
Everyone has the same question. Marco, are the United States still with us?
There are 2,000 reporters here who have come to The Hague to work this year. And admit it, it's very hard to recognize a garage in this huge hall. But indeed, this year, the media center is located underground in a garage. We've come here from all corners of the world, which means we're interested in completely different questions. But Secretary General Rutte wasn't wrong about the main thing. Indeed, the two names I hear most often from my colleagues are Trump and Zelensky. This is the first summit in many years that lasts only one working session. It's the very first summit of its kind for the Netherlands. It is being heavily guarded by nearly half of the entire country's police force and also the military personnel. On land, in the air, and from the sea. It's also the first summit for Mark Rutte, the former Dutch Prime Minister, in his new role as Secretary General. And you can't envy him, because first he had to figure out how to organize the summit in such a way that Trump would definitely come and be satisfied. Specifically how to reach an agreement with all the alliance member states, some of which don't even allocate 2% of their GDP to defense, so that they would promise to give 5%, so that Trump would have something to take credit for. As if to say, I came and I achieved this. On his way to the summit, the American president shows off to the cameras a personal message from Rutte in a rather complimentary style for the whole world to see. Trump boasts that Rutte is praising him.
Donald, you have brought us to a truly important moment for America, Europe, and the entire world. You will achieve what no American president has been able to accomplish in recent decades.
Later, already on camera, the Secretary General will confirm, yes, he recorded it, yes, that's what he thinks, and yes, he's okay with making personal messages public.
Listen, but that's absolutely true. Do you think that 7 or 8 countries which hadn't even been spending 2% of their GDP on defense would have reached the 2% threshold if Trump hadn't been elected president of the United States? Do you think, of course, there is a threat from Russia, China, and so on, but that countries would have agreed to raise the spending threshold to 5% if Trump hadn't been elected president? So I don't mind if my statements are made public. It's simply a statement of fact.
Another question that interests many, especially the Baltic states who feel almost on the front line bordering Russia, is Donald Trump's attitude toward Article 5 of the NATO Charter. Very one that states an attack on one NATO member is an attack on the entire alliance, and so it will be repelled immediately and collectively.
It depends on how you define it. There are many definitions of Article 5. You know that, right?
But while actual NATO members are questioning whether America would defend them if something happens, the problem for Ukraine was different. Given that Trump doesn't see Ukraine in NATO at all, it was very important for our European allies to preserve the wording we achieved at the last summit in Washington, particularly the statement that Ukraine's path to NATO is irreversible. That is why they decided simply not to talk about Ukraine's prospects in NATO, to keep silent about them in order to preserve them, and at the same time, to tie military aid to Ukraine to the same 5% of the alliance's defense spending. In other words, all the member countries of the alliance, by spending money on aid to Ukraine, count it as part of the expenditures they are now promising to Trump. By the way, the United States itself has no intention of increasing its spending to 5%. Given the size of the country and accordingly the size of its budget, they already spent twice as much on defense as all the other alliance countries combined. This is precisely the root of Trump's constant complaints that America pays for everyone's protection and doesn't want to do so anymore.
President Trump, dear Donald, you made this change possible. Under your leadership since 2016, European partners have already increased spending by $1 trillion. And today's decision will bring new trillions to our collective defense.
The NATO Secretary General is opening the meeting an hour later, and that's not uncommon for such gatherings. And then there's Rutte, who was supposed to greet all the distinguished guests, but is being held up at a bilateral meeting by Donald Trump, who, as usual, has turned it into an impromptu briefing. The Secretary General once again has to repeat what he had personally written to Trump. The American strike on Iran was the best, and Donald Trump swearing on air before his departure to The Hague, when he learned that Iran and Israel were continuing to exchange strikes, this is how it sounded, and this is still a very mild, broadcast-appropriate translation.
These two countries have been fighting for so long and so fiercely that they have no idea what the hell they're even doing it for. You see? Given the circumstances, that's a perfectly reasonable thing. They had a huge fight, like kids in school. They're fighting like madmen. It's impossible to stop them, so let them fight for a couple of minutes. Then it's easier to stop them.
And sometimes Dad has to choose his words carefully. Sometimes he has to resort to a swear word or two.
So, at a time when Russia is waging the largest war in Europe since World War II, forging ever stronger alliances with North Korea, Iran, and China, a meeting of NATO leaders is delayed because they're debating the appropriateness of the American president swearing. Ukraine's so-called greatest friend, Viktor Orbán, doesn't hide his feelings about us.
NATO has no business in Ukraine. Ukraine is not a NATO member, nor is Russia. And my job is to make sure it stays that way.
But it's well known that the Hungarian Prime Minister, no matter what rhetoric he uses in front of the cameras, agrees to everything the United States signs off on. So, together with everyone else, he adopts a declaration that, aside from NATO's internal matters, mentions two countries. In the second point, Russia was named as a threat, and they pledged to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP by 2035. In the third point, these 5% are broken down into 3.5% for defense and 1.5% for infrastructure. In the same point, the Allies reaffirmed their readiness to continue supporting Ukraine, whose security is important for the alliance. Thus, military aid to Ukraine is equated with defense spending. And in the very first point of this declaration, NATO confirms for anyone who doubted. Article 5 is in effect. And although the Western colleagues I spoke with were somewhat shocked by the amount of flattery with which the Secretary General and other alliance leaders greeted the American president, it worked in at least one respect. First of all, Trump did not leave the summit early, as he did in 2019 in London, and secondly, he was satisfied. After the meeting and the publication of the final declaration, Trump meets with Zelensky. They talk for almost an hour, and contrary to our expectations, neither we nor our American colleagues are allowed into the meeting, not at the beginning, nor at the end. Zelensky does not speak to the press at all for the rest of that day. He only releases photographs, one of which shows him presenting Trump with evidence that the Russians, as always, are lying.
He also told the president about how the technical team's meetings in Istanbul went, as well as about the exchanges of prisoners and the deceased. Russia handed over to us the bodies of their own dead. Right now, examinations are being conducted in Kyiv to identify their relatives. We discussed the situation on the battlefield. Putin is definitely not winning. I presented the president with factual evidence of what is actually happening on the ground.
Because of this bilateral meeting, Trump's press conference is delayed, and the American president arrives accompanied by Defense Secretary Westlet and Secretary of State Rubio, who stand on either side of him like bodyguards. As before, Trump mainly talks about Iran, repeatedly calling the American strikes on nuclear facilities a complete and unquestionable victory. He calls Zelensky a nice guy and then says the following:
I did not discuss a ceasefire with Zelensky. I just wanted to see how he was doing.
Then he repeats, the war would never have happened if he had been president. This is Trump's favorite phrase. Here he is asked, you've already been president for a whole 5 months, and Russia continues the war. Here is his reaction.
My statements about ending the war in Ukraine in 24 hours were, of course, sarcastic. Putin is a more complicated person. I also had problems with Zelensky. This is the most complicated war.
Immediately after, a critically important question for Ukraine is raised about the Patriots, which we desperately lack for our defense. And it comes from BBC correspondent Miroslava Persi, the wife of a serviceman. Trump sends his regards to him.
Do you currently reside in Ukraine at this present moment?
My husband is there, and I am in Warsaw with the children because he wanted me to leave.
Is your husband currently serving in the military?
Yes, he is a serviceman.
Is he there now?
Yes.
That's sad and difficult. Here's what I'll tell you. They really want those Patriot systems. We'll see if we can get a few. They're hard to get. We need them too. We're supplying them to Israel. They're 100% effective. It's hard to believe, and they want them more than anything. That's a very good question, and I wish you luck. I can see how upsetting this is for you. Say hello to your husband.
At the same time, Zelensky is meeting with European leaders and the Secretary General, obviously, among other things, to discuss how their meeting with American President went.
The summit declaration clearly outlines the assistance. This is very important for the next 5 to 10 years. Not that we think the war will last that long, but we will provide you with all the necessary support.
Our participation here truly demonstrates strong support from you. Thank you for that.
This can be called a victory. From now on, military aid to Ukraine is considered NATO defense spending. But there is no legal mechanism that would obligate the alliance member states to spend as much on defense as they have pledged. So, to what extent this declaration will serve as a tribute to the American president's desire to count this summit among his victories, and to what extent it will actually reshape the future budgets of 31 countries and how their voters will react to such a redistribution of resources only become clear next year. The next summit, by the way, is scheduled to be held in Turkey in 2026. Reporting from The Hague, Yana Slesarchuk, Andriy Marchenko, Roman Sadovnikov, TSN 1+1 Marathon, United News.